Maria had planned the evening for days fresh flowers on the table, soft music humming in the background, and her husband Daniel's favorite rosemary chicken roasting in the oven. A few neighbors were coming over for a relaxed weekend dinner, the kind meant to ease the weight of a long work week. Everything was calm, predictable, and warm. Until the doorbell rang an hour earlier than expected. Daniel opened the door, and Maria watched from the kitchen as his entire posture stiffened. Standing on the doorstep was a tall man with a rugged smile, slightly unshaven and carrying an air of familiarity mixed with trouble. Before Maria could ask who he was, the man embraced Daniel tightly, almost possessively. "Alex?" Daniel whispered. As if speaking to a ghost, Maria had heard the name before mentioned occasionally over the years, always in brief comments lacking detail. "My old friend," Daniel would say, and immediately change the subject. She had assumed Alex was simply a chapter from Daniel's youth he didn't feel like revisiting. But now, seeing Daniel's stunned expression, she realized there was far more beneath the surface. Alex stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes scanned the house with a nostalgic tenderness, as if he had known the place for years. "Danny boy, you haven't changed at all," he joked, nudging Daniel's shoulder. But Daniel had changed. He had gone pale, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding Maria's gaze. She could tell he was struggling to mask something. Anxiety, guilt, fear. She couldn't name it yet. The dinner began awkwardly. The neighbors chatted, unaware of the silent storm brewing between Daniel and Alex. Maria set dishes on the table, all while observing their interactions. Alex, casual and smiling, told story after story from their teenage days. Stories full of daring adventures and borderline reckless fun. But every time Alex spoke, Daniel tensed. "Remember that night at the old quarry?" Alex started with a grin. Daniel cut him off sharply. "Let's not go into ancient history. Maria doesn't want to hear about our childish mistakes." Maria assured him she didn't mind. But Daniel shot her a look begging her not to encourage. Alex thought it was the first time she had seen her husband truly uncomfortable in their home. Alex laughed, brushing it off. "You were always the serious one," he teased. But his tone carried a strange edge, like he knew the power of his words and the effect they had on Daniel. Maria's curiosity grew. Daniel had always portrayed his childhood as quiet, controlled, sheltered. But the Alex sitting at her table painted a different picture, one that contradicted everything she knew about her husband. Why hide harmless childhood stories? Why fear an old friend? As the night progressed, Maria sensed something unspoken between them, something heavy and unresolved. And though she couldn't identify it yet, she felt her peaceful weekend dinner slipping into the shadows of a past she never knew existed. The morning after the dinner, Maria couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. She kept replaying the evening in her mind, the way Daniel had flinched at Alex's stories, the tension in his jaw, the flicker of guilt in his eyes. Something was being hidden from her, and Alex seemed to know exactly what it was. She needed answers. Alex asked to speak with Maria privately. At first, she hesitated, unsure whether it was appropriate to separate herself from Daniel. But there was something earnest in Alex's eyes, a seriousness beneath his casual smile that compelled her to follow him into the quiet sunroom. The room smelled faintly of jasmine from the open window, yet Maria could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. Once seated, Alex began recounting incidents from their teenage years. At first, they seemed lighthearted. Mischievous pranks, late-night adventures, running from neighbors after harmless but chaotic pranks. He spoke of daring bets and laughter-filled nights, all of which Daniel had either minimized or completely left out of his own stories to Maria. But soon, Maria noticed the inconsistencies. Details in Alex's stories clashed sharply with what Daniel had told her. For example, Daniel had always described himself as cautious and responsible, the boy who kept Alex out of trouble. Yet Alex described Daniel as daring, reckless, and often leading the charge into danger. There were nights he couldn't explain, events he never mentioned. Every story revealed a version of Daniel Maria had never known, a version that contradicted her careful perception of her husband. As Alex recounted one particular night when they had driven too far into the woods and narrowly escaped a confrontation with local authorities, Maria's heart raced. Daniel had never told her about this, claiming his teenage years had been ordinary and uneventful. Yet here was Alex, describing the night in vivid detail, with Daniel actively participating, taking risks that could have led to serious consequences. Maria felt a pang of confusion and betrayal. Why would Daniel hide such things? They weren't dangerous crimes, they were youthful mistakes, but the secrecy was deliberate. Was it shame? Fear of judgment? Or something darker that Alex hadn't yet revealed? Alex seemed to sense her questions and hesitated, pausing to measure his words. Daniel always had a way of protecting himself from blame, he said carefully. He didn't want anyone to see the reckless side of him. Not even you. Maria's curiosity deepened. She realized that these contradictions were more than trivial inconsistencies. They hinted at a secret, carefully guarded for decades. And the realization struck her. Daniel's past, the one he had hidden so diligently, might be far more complex and possibly troubling than she had imagined. By the time the conversation ended, Maria was left with more questions than answers. She understood that Alex had come with a purpose, and that Daniel's reticence was not just about embarrassment, but about shielding her from something heavy, something he had carried alone. Maria felt the first tremor of a revelation she wasn't prepared for, and she knew, deep down, that the past Daniel had hidden was about to come crashing into their present lives. The day had begun quietly, but Maria could feel the tension lingering from the night before. Alex had left after their long conversation, leaving behind a sense of unease that refused to dissipate. Maria's mind raced as she prepared lunch, thinking about the discrepancies in the stories Alex had shared. Daniel, on the other hand, was unusually quiet, moving through the house with a distant, almost haunted expression. Maria knew her husband carried secrets, but she had never realized the depth of the shadows in his past. Later that afternoon, Maria found herself alone with Alex once again. He had asked to speak privately, claiming that some stories were too complicated to share in passing. She agreed, curiosity overpowering caution. They sat in the sunroom, the light filtering softly through the blinds, creating a calm contrast to the tension in the air. Alex's eyes were serious, his expression somber. This was no longer playful reminiscing. Then he spoke a name, Elias Morrow. Maria froze mid-breath. The words hung in the air, heavy and significant. She noticed the immediate reaction from Daniel, who had been passing by the doorway. The color drained from his face, his hands clenched tightly, and he abruptly left the room without a word. The sight of her husband fleeing so suddenly shook Maria to her core. Whatever Elias Morrow represented, it was clearly terrifying or devastating to Daniel. Alex turned to Maria, his voice quiet but firm. I didn't want to say anything in front of him, he admitted. Daniel should have told you the truth long ago, but he was afraid. Afraid of how it would change the way you see him. Maria's curiosity burned. She pressed Alex for details. He hesitated, glancing toward the hallway as if expecting Daniel to return. Then, carefully, Alex revealed a piece of a story that made Maria's heart pound. Elias Morrow was with us the night something terrible happened. That night, it changed everything. Daniel and I were involved, and he carries the guilt of it to this day. Maria's mind reeled. What kind of accident? What had Daniel done or failed to do that caused him such visible anguish? The past she thought she knew, the picture of her husband as kind, responsible, and gentle, now seemed incomplete, perhaps even misleading. Alex's explanation was deliberate and slow, each word chosen with care. He told Maria that Elias had been connected to an incident in Daniel's youth, an event that had been covered up or forgotten by others, but not by Daniel. The man she had married had lived under the weight of a secret for years, silently punishing himself while presenting a calm, ordinary exterior. As Alex spoke, Maria realized the depth of Daniel's hidden pain. The stories Alex shared were no longer just teenage mischief. They were clues to a truth that had been buried, feared, and protected for decades. The gravity of the situation hit her. This wasn't merely a past mistake. It was something that had defined her husband's life, shaped his personality, and created a barrier between him and complete honesty with her. By the time their conversation ended, Maria understood one undeniable truth. The moment Alex mentioned Elias Morrow, the fragile balance of their lives shifted. Daniel's past was about to collide with the present, and whatever had been hidden for 20 years was on the verge of being revealed. The evening settled into an uneasy silence. Maria had spent the day piecing together fragments from Alex's revelations, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. Daniel, who had been withdrawn and tense since Alex mentioned Elias Morrow, finally faced Maria in the living room. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes, usually steady and reassuring, now held a vulnerability Maria had never seen before. She sensed that the moment for truth had arrived, and that whatever came next would change everything she thought she knew about her husband. Daniel took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maria, there's something I've never told you. Something I should have shared a long time ago." He paused, swallowing hard, as if the words themselves were a burden he had carried for decades. Maria sat down beside him, holding his hand, ready to listen. He began recounting the events from his 17th year, when he and Alex had spent one fateful night at an abandoned quarry with their friend, Elias. It had started as a thrill-seeking adventure, a dare among boys testing courage and limits. But the playful energy quickly turned dangerous. They were climbing along the quarry's edges when Elias lost his footing. In a terrifying moment, he slipped and fell into the dark, churning water below. Daniel's voice shook as he continued. "I jumped in after him, trying to save him. But it all happened so fast. I was drinking that night, careless, and I froze for a second too long. I thought I failed him." He paused again, the weight of the memory pressing down. Maria felt her heart ache, realizing the torment Daniel had carried silently for 20 years. Alex had always insisted Daniel had done all he could, that he had saved Elias, yet Daniel had never believed it. The guilt had shadowed every major decision in his life, influencing his career choices, his friendships, and even their relationship. Maria realized now that Daniel's careful, cautious nature was not merely personality, it was shaped by decades of silent penance for a moment he perceived as failure. She listened in stunned silence, as Daniel admitted why he had hidden his story from her. Fear of judgment, fear that she would see him differently, fear that the weight of his guilt would break their life together. "I wanted to protect you from this," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I thought if I carried it alone, it would spare you the burden. But it wasn't fair to you. And it wasn't fair to me either." Maria reached out, cupping his face, and whispered words of reassurance. She realized that understanding this past was key, not just to forgiving him, but to helping him release decades of self-inflicted punishment. The story, harrowing as it was, revealed a man who had made mistakes, yes, but also a man who had acted with bravery under unimaginable pressure. By the end of the night, Maria held Daniel close, absorbing the enormity of his confession. The secret he had buried for 20 years was finally out. yet it brought them closer instead of tearing them apart. The past had been heavy, but sharing it began the first steps toward healing, not just for Daniel, but for their relationship as a whole. Just when Maria thought she had understood the full weight of Daniel's secret, Alex dropped another truth that shifted everything again. She had believed that hearing Daniel's confession about Elias Morrow, the accident at the quarry, the years of guilt, the fear of judgment was the climax of the story. But Alex had saved the most astonishing revelation for last, and it was a secret even Daniel didn't know. The three of them were sitting in the living room. Daniel looked exhausted but relieved from finally unburdening himself, while Maria's mind was still piecing together every detail she had learned over the past days. Alex leaned forward, his expression serious, the playful mischievousness of earlier nights gone. "There's something I didn't tell Daniel," he began carefully. "Something he should know, but no one had the right timing to tell him before." Maria's curiosity spiked, sensing the gravity in Alex's voice. Alex revealed that Elias Morrow had not died that night. Against all assumptions, Elias had survived the fall. A fisherman had found him at the bottom of the quarry early the next morning, and although he had suffered temporary amnesia, he eventually recovered. His family had moved him far away to protect him and give him a fresh start. Maria's mouth went dry. She turned to Daniel, who seemed unable to comprehend what Alex had just said. For 20 years, Daniel had carried the weight of guilt, believing he had failed his friend and that Elias had perished because of his recklessness. He had punished himself silently, living under the shadow of that night, never imagining that Elias was alive. Alex explained further that he had been in contact with Elias all these years, discreetly, waiting for the right moment to reunite him with Daniel. "I couldn't tell him earlier," Alex admitted, "because Elias needed his own time to decide. He wanted to meet Daniel when he was ready, not forced by circumstances." Maria was stunned by the thoughtfulness and secrecy Alex had maintained. The entire situation now made sense, why Daniel's guilt had been so consuming and why Alex had approached Maria first. To prepare her for what was coming, Maria realized the emotional burden Daniel had endured. He had been living under a false assumption for 2 decades, believing he had lost a friend due to a momentary lapse, a night of youthful recklessness. And yet, the truth was far more forgiving. Elias had survived and even thrived. The revelation sparked a mixture of relief and awe within Maria. She understood that Alex's intervention was not just about revealing the past. It was about liberating Daniel from 20 years of unnecessary guilt. As the room sank into quiet reflection, Maria felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward Alex. The man who had once been a source of tension had now become the key to her husband's emotional freedom. She also realized that this revelation would reshape their entire relationship. Daniel's inner turmoil had been a silent barrier, and now it was finally lifting, offering a chance for healing, forgiveness, and renewed trust. By the end of the evening, Maria could see the relief washing over Daniel's face. Tears welled in his eyes as he processed the truth. The past that had haunted him was no longer a chain but a memory he could finally release. And in that moment, Maria understood the true power of honesty, timing, and the long path to emotional redemption. The day finally came when Elias Morrow returned to the town he had left as a teenager. Maria, Daniel, and Alex waited at a quiet cafe near the river, a place chosen for its calm, private atmosphere. Daniel's hand shook slightly as he sipped his coffee, his eyes darting nervously to the door each time it opened. 20 years of guilt, secrecy, and fear had culminated in this moment. Maria could feel the weight of history pressing down on them all. Yet there was also a strange sense of anticipation, a fragile hope that closure might finally arrive. When Elias walked through the door, time seemed to pause. He looked around, slightly hesitant, and then his eyes fell on Daniel. Recognition flared immediately, a flicker of memory and familiarity bridging decades in a single moment. Daniel stood abruptly, almost unable to speak, as emotion surged, relief, disbelief, and a deep, long-held guilt threatening to resurface. Maria instinctively reached for his hand, grounding him. Sensing the storm of feelings he was struggling to contain, Elias approached cautiously, yet with warmth, his own demeanor calm and forgiving. "Daniel," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the years but free of blame. "I never blamed you. That night, it was an accident. You did everything you could." The impact of Elias's words hit Daniel like a wave, washing away 2 decades of torment in an instant. Tears streamed down his face, unashamed and unrestrained. Maria watched, her heart swelling, as she realized the incredible power of truth, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Daniel had carried a burden that was never truly his to bear, and now, in the presence of Elias, that burden began to dissolve. Alex watched quietly from the side, a small, knowing smile on his face. He had orchestrated this reunion with careful thought and patience, understanding that timing and emotional readiness were crucial. He had kept Elias's survival a secret until both men were prepared, Daniel emotionally, Elias physically and mentally. The reunion wasn't just about revealing a truth. It was about giving Daniel the gift of closure and allowing him to step out of the shadow of self-imposed guilt. As the 3 men talked, recounting the night of the accident, the near-death experience, and the years that followed, Maria felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Daniel laughed softly, choked on tears, and finally exhaled in relief. The man who had been haunted by fear and regret for 2 decades was beginning to heal, piece by piece. Maria realized that this event had strengthened not only Daniel, but their marriage as well. By the evening's end, Daniel and Elias embraced once more, a gesture of reconciliation, understanding, and renewed friendship. Maria stood beside her husband, grateful for Alex's intervention, for Elias's forgiveness, and for the chance to witness the transformation of a man who had suffered silently for far too long. The past, which had once threatened to control their lives, was now firmly in the past. Daniel's world had shifted, freed from guilt, filled instead with hope, love, and the possibility of living fully in the present. And in that moment, Maria knew that the power of truth revealed at the right time had changed everything for the better.